Hello, dear viewers of Sci-Fi Stories. We want to sincerely thank you for your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to operate. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1, so we can pay our hardworking staff to sustain their lives and keep creating stories for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or comment section of this video. The air inside the grand atrium of Aegis 9 felt heavy and thick with the intoxicating and suffocating aromas of 1,000 different star systems. The Intergalactic Culinary Diplomacy Conference was never truly about gastronomy. It was a battlefield where empires wielded rare and lethal ingredients instead of warships. The polished titanium floors reflected the cold and sterile light of the neutral station, while the ambient sound was dominated by a low and throbbing hum of atmospheric scrubbers, working beyond their designed capacity. Every breath taken in this colossal room tasted faintly of ozone and burning copper, acting as a constant reminder of the volatile elements gathered in one enclosed space. Amidst the towering dignitaries, Emery Bunker stood as an anomaly. As the sole representative of humanity, she did not wear the shifting quantum silk that draped the crystalline forms of the Alpha Centauri delegates, nor did she possess the pulsating bio-armor that clung to the warlords of the Outer Rim. Emery wore a faded canvas field chef uniform, with its fabric bearing the stubborn stains of countless unnamed planets. Her heavy combat boots scuffed against the pristine floor. She looked entirely out of place, like a frail and primitive creature surrounded by gods of the cosmos. Yet her posture lacked any trace of intimidation. She watched the proceedings with the bored and heavy-lidded gaze of someone waiting for water to boil. The stifling quiet of the hall was shattered by the slithering and heavy steps of Ambassador Xylar. Towering over the assembly, Xylar was a terrifying amalgamation of thick, thorny vines and iridescent reptilian scales. The ambassador slid to the center of the room and motioned grandly with a clawed appendage toward a massive cylindrical containment unit. Inside the thick, transparent walls, a distortion of light rippled. They were 3 apex predators, which were beasts so lethal they possessed no formal scientific designation, but only a reputation built on slaughtered colonies. The creatures paced relentlessly. Their bodies possessed the terrifying ability to bend light, rendering them nearly invisible, save for the violent displacement of air. Even through the reinforced glass, the room could hear the low and bone-rattling frequencies of their muffled growls. Xylar spoke with a voice that was a wet and hissing scrape, echoing off the high ceiling. It proudly declared these specimens as the ultimate delicacy, captured from the darkest death worlds of the unmapped sectors. Just as Xylar boasted of their deadly neurotoxin, a sudden and blinding red light bathed the hall. The station artificial intelligence system blared through the overhead speakers, with its synthesized voice devoid of emotion, yet signaling absolute doom. Biological containment breach detected. Level 4 red alert initiated. Lethal airborne neurotoxin present. Absolute chaos threatened to break the diplomatic veneer. The microscopic pores of the containment glass had allowed a mere fraction of the beast's gaseous venom to seep into the room. Instantly, the air turned acidic. The scent of ozone intensified into a choking and metallic stench. Heavily armored station guards immediately stepped forward, with their heavy kinetic rifles raised and safety protocols disengaged as they prepared to unleash lethal force into the tank. The tension was absolute. The room held its collective breath, terrified that a single plasma discharge might ignite the volatile atmosphere. Xylar turned its massive and scaled head toward the human delegation, with its eyes narrowing with malicious intent. The ambassador pointed a jagged claw directly at Emery. The alien hybrid raised its voice above the blaring alarms to issue a harsh and mocking warning. It demanded the fragile human step back, while describing in excruciating and arrogant detail how the venom would liquefy her primitive nervous system in seconds. It was a veiled and humiliating threat, intended to showcase the dominance of the ambassador over the supposedly weak human race. The deafening sirens and the paralyzing fear of the alien delegates created a space of pure and unadulterated dread. But then a sound cut through the suffocating terror. It was bright and sharp and entirely inappropriate for the setting. Emery Bunker tilted her head back and laughed. It was a genuine and booming laugh that echoed off the titanium walls and shattered the carefully constructed horror of the moment. She ignored the leveled weapons of the guards. She ignored the hissing fury of Ambassador Xylar. With slow and deliberate steps, she walked directly into the toxic cloud leaking from the tank. The alien dignitaries gasped in horror. Emery stepped right up to the heavily fortified glass and leaned in close to the shifting invisible nightmares within before casually tapping her knuckles against the transparent surface. She turned her head slightly to look at the towering ambassador and spoke with absolute and terrifying calm. "Which one do you mean? I have eaten 6 of these." The heavy silence that followed her statement was more deafening than the blaring sirens. The station chief of security, a massive cybernetic entity composed of dark alloy and neural cables, slammed a heavy fist onto the tactical console. The chief muted the audio alarms, leaving only the pulsing red light to wash over the frozen assembly. With a swift sequence of biometric commands, the chief accessed the highly classified intergalactic database. A towering holographic projection flared to life above the central diplomatic table, casting a harsh and sterile blue glow over the terrified delegates. The display rapidly cascaded through the biological records and expedition logs of Emery Bunker. The data scrolling across the 3-dimensional screen was a testament to impossible survival. It detailed her time on Kepler 99, which was a quarantine death world categorized by its corrosive atmosphere and apex predators. The official logs showed she was marooned there for exactly 420 days, with absolutely no supply drops and a shattered distress beacon. The visual records attached to the file depicted a barren wasteland of jagged obsidian, toxic green fog, and pools of boiling acid. Yet the thermal imaging from the eventual rescue ship did not show a starving or broken victim. It showed a lone human stalking the very creatures that ruled the desolate planet. The translation matrices of the alien ambassadors hummed as they processed the raw data. The records proved that Emery had survived by systematically reversing the food chain. She had hunted the apex hunters. Emery did not flinch under the crushing weight of a dozen alien species, staring at her private medical and expedition files. Instead, she casually adjusted the rolled cuffs of her faded chef coat and gestured toward the shifting optical distortions inside the containment glass. People always assume their meat is too tough because of the dense, subcutaneous armor. Emery stated with the calm and authoritative tone of a culinary instructor addressing a classroom of novices. But the real issue is the neural communication gland, located right at the base of the secondary spinal column. If you do not sever that specific gland within exactly 45 seconds of the kill, the creature flushes its entire muscular system with liquid panic. It ruins the whole cut and makes the meat taste like battery acid mixed with burnt hair. She traced a steady finger in the air, mimicking a precise and deep surgical slice. However, if you extract the gland cleanly, the cellular structure instantly relaxes. The flesh has a truly fascinating marbling. Once properly bled and slow roasted over a low thermal vent for about 6 hours, it possesses a rich and earthy flavor profile. It tastes remarkably like smoked poultry paired with heavy metallic mushrooms. The collective horror in the room fundamentally shifted. Moments ago, the delegates were paralyzed by the raw fear of the 3 invisible nightmares pacing inside the reinforced glass. Now their wide and unblinking eyes were locked entirely on Emery. The heavily armored warlords and the quantum-draped diplomats felt a cold and creeping disgust. They looked at this incredibly small and seemingly fragile primate and realized her biological makeup defied all known logic. According to the medical scans glowing brightly above them, her digestive tract and immune system had adapted into a biological black hole capable of neutralizing and absorbing catastrophic toxins. She was not merely a diplomatic chef. She was an apex survivor who looked at galactic terrors and only saw dinner ingredients. But while the entire room was captivated by the sheer absurdity of human resilience, a subtle and deadly process was beginning entirely unnoticed. Beneath the thick titanium floorboards and bouncing off the polished walls, a highly encrypted radio frequency was pulsing through the grand atrium. It was an ultra-low band transmission completely undetectable to standard auditory sensors, but deeply felt in the marrow of the bone. Inside the containment tank, the frantic and aggressive pacing of the three invisible beasts began to slow down. Their dual cardiovascular systems, previously pumping erratic surges of adrenaline, suddenly began to regulate. Their massive hearts began to beat in perfect unison. The rhythm locked onto the invisible transmission, aligning their biological rhythms into a single and synchronized metronome of impending violence. Emery was still watching the stunned faces of the delegates when her survival instincts violently interceded. She stopped mid-breath. The confident posture vanished instantly, replaced by the cold and calculating stare of a cornered predator. She flared her nostrils and drew in a shallow, careful breath of the contaminated air. The metallic stench of ozone had been a constant presence since the breach, but a sudden and drastic shift in the molecular weight of the air caught her immediate attention. The chemical structure of the room was actively changing around them. The faint smell of oxidized copper was rapidly mutating into the heavy and sickeningly sweet scent of decaying organic matter and ionized plasma. Her eyes darted back to the containment unit. The beasts were no longer moving. They were standing perfectly still, in a flawless triangular formation. Emery felt a cold spike of pure adrenaline hit her system. The culinary exhibition was a complete lie. These creatures were never brought aboard this neutral station to be showcased as an exotic delicacy or a symbol of diplomatic power. They were living biological artillery, and the fuse had just been lit. The optical distortion inside the tank vanished, replaced by a horrifying and vivid reality. The three previously invisible predators simultaneously dropped their natural camouflage. Their thick and scaled skin erupted into a searing, bioluminescent, and bloody red hue. The violent color throbbed in rhythm with their synchronized heartbeats. From the deep ridges along their muscular spines, thick plumes of dark and viscous gas began to vent rapidly into the confined space of the tank. It was a massive secretion of hyperconcentrated biological pheromones. The invisible electrostatic field designed to hold them back began to hiss and spit furiously. Jagged and glowing cracks spiderwebbed across the reinforced glass as the intense chemical reaction began to literally eat through the energy barriers. The sheer terror in the grand atrium spiked abruptly, turning the massive room into a suffocating metal tomb. The walls felt as though they were rapidly closing in, pressing the breathable air out of existence. Emery did not hesitate. Her voice cut through the rising panic like a serrated blade. "Initiate total blast door lockdown immediately!" she screamed at the cybernetic security chief. "Seal the vents! Nobody gets in, and absolutely nobody gets out!" The alien delegates shrieked in protest, horrified at the prospect of being trapped with the beasts. But Emery recognized the exact chemical signature of the dark fog. This was a highly calculated biological assassination. The pheromones venting from the creatures were not just toxic. When combined with the high levels of ambient oxygen inside the diplomatic hall, they created an invisible, hyper-pressurized, and highly volatile vapor. Once the mixture reached critical mass, it would trigger a silent chemical explosion designed to violently corrode eardrums and instantly liquefy the brain matter of any living organism in the vicinity. The highly trained station guards broke under the crushing psychological pressure. The primal fear of being eaten alive overtook their strict military discipline. Two heavily armored guards at the front of the defensive line panicked wildly. They raised their heavy plasma rifles, their fingers trembling as they slammed the weapons into the maximum thermal yield settings, aiming directly at the cracked containment glass. Emery moved with a speed that defied her small human frame. She launched herself across the polished titanium floor, closing the distance before the guards could squeeze their triggers. She drove her heavy combat boot directly into the knee joint of the first guard, snapping the armor seal and sending him crashing to the floor. Using his falling momentum, she spun rapidly and delivered a brutal, precise strike to the throat of the second guard, dropping him instantly in a choking heap. "Hold your fire!" Emery roared, kicking the fallen plasma rifles away across the floor. A single spark of superheated plasma will act as the ignition catalyst. You fire those weapons, and the saturated oxygen in this room will detonate. We will all be vaporized before the sound even reaches our ears. But the catastrophic chain reaction had already progressed too far. The central artificial intelligence system of the station succumbed completely to the corrosive vapor infiltrating the primary servers. The overhead lights flickered violently and died, plunging the room into absolute darkness, save for the terrifying crimson glow of the three predators and the rapid flashing of emergency strobes. With a deafening and apocalyptic crunch, the electrostatic glass shattered entirely. A physical shockwave of pure, concentrated pheromones blasted into the room, knocking several tall diplomats off their feet. The three massive beasts leaped from their ruined cage. The remaining guards braced for a bloody massacre, expecting the predators to tear through the trapped crowd with razor-sharp fangs and claws. But the beasts completely ignored the fragile flesh of the screaming dignitaries. Moving with terrifying and coordinated intelligence, they sprinted to three distinct and calculated corners within the expansive hall. They locked their heavy claws into the metal flooring, positioning their massive bodies to form a perfect, equilateral triangle encompassing the entire delegation. They tilted their enormous heads back, their throats violently expanded, glowing with a deep and unnatural internal heat. They were not here to bite or tear. They were preparing to deploy a devastating sonic resonance wave. A low and throbbing vibration began to pulse through the very foundation of the room. It was not a sound that could be heard through normal auditory channels, but a violent wave of pressure that attacked the nervous system directly. The psychological and physical collapse of the room was instantaneous. High-ranking ambassadors clutched their skulls in sheer agony. They dropped to their knees upon the cold floor, their internal organs vibrating at a lethal frequency. Within seconds, the delegates began coughing violently, expelling thick wads of luminescent blue blood from their mouths and noses as their internal safety barriers ruptured under the acoustic pressure. They collapsed one by one, thrashing helplessly in the toxic and heavy air. The entire room was falling to the invisible arrow of the assassins. But amidst the dying and the broken bodies of the intergalactic elite, Emery Bunker did not fall. She stood perfectly upright in the exact center of the deadly resonance triangle. She did not cough, and she did not bleed. Instead, her body began to undergo a terrifying microscopic reaction. Her skin flushed deeply, and she began to radiate an intense, localized, and bizarre physical heat. Her biology, forged in the fires of a death world, was actively rewriting its own rules to meet the threat head-on. The crushing atmospheric pressure of the sonic wave continued to tear at the physical foundation of the Grand Atrium. But Emery Bunker remained completely unfazed. Instead of retreating toward the heavily sealed blast doors, or cowering on the titanium floor like the bleeding alien dignitaries, she calmly reached down into the thick leather shaft of her right combat boot. Her fingers wrapped around the worn, ergonomic handle of a heavy carbon alloy kitchen knife. The blade was entirely unpolished, marred by 100 deep scratches, and stained with the biological remnants of countless alien ecosystems. She pulled the blade free with a sharp scrape of metal against leather. She did not strike a martial arts stance. She merely tested the weight of the knife in her palm, looked directly at the towering beasts, and spoke with the terrifyingly practical tone of a worker starting a grueling shift. "It is prep time." She did not wait for the creatures to make the first move. Emery sprinted directly toward the closest apex predator. Her approach was not that of a soldier executing a tactical assault. It was the calculated, deeply focused advance of a master butcher stepping up to a massive cutting board. The beast, locked in its resonant stance, swung a massive, heavily armored claw at her torso, fully intending to bisect the small human. But Emery knew this species intimately. Her survival on Kepler-99 had required her to dissect and consume 6 of these exact creatures. She possessed a flawless understanding of their anatomical architecture. She knew exactly where their biological design failed. The creature possessed a severe optical and sensory blind spot, located precisely behind the primary articulation of its lower left leg joint. Emery slid smoothly under the devastating swipe, dropping her center of gravity so low, her knee nearly scraped the polished floor. She positioned herself perfectly within that blind spot. The beast roared in confusion, unable to track her sudden disappearance. Before the creature could pivot, Emery went to work. Her carbon alloy knife became a terrifying blur of motion. She executed a series of lightning-fast, surgical incisions directly into the thick, heavily scaled flesh of the creature's lower neck. She did not hack or slash wildly. Every single movement was a deliberate, anatomical separation of dense muscle fibers from the secondary spinal column. She was actively filleting the monster while it was still breathing. The creature thrashed violently, screaming in a mixture of rage and sudden agony. But Emery used its own massive weight and momentum as a lever to pry the wound open wider. She reached her bare hand directly into the steaming, bioluminescent red cavity of its neck. Her fingers curled around the heavy, pulsing neurotoxin gland. With one brutal and decisive twist, she tore the organ completely free from its nervous system. The gland dripped with highly corrosive, boiling venom that hissed angrily as it hit the floor. Emery spun around, her eyes sweeping the ruined conference room. She spotted a shattered molecular gastronomy display station, featuring an open, bubbling vat of cryogenic liquid nitrogen. With the precision of a seasoned athlete, she hurled the severed, leaking gland straight into the freezing container. The intense, sub-zero temperature instantly neutralized the volatile chemical reaction, freezing the lethal biological bomb into a harmless, solid block of gray ice. The first predator collapsed into a heavy, twitching heap, entirely disabled. The surviving ambassadors, gasping for breath and clutching their bleeding ears, watched this horrific spectacle with absolute, mind-shattering dread. They were witnessing a supposedly frail human dismantle a legendary, apex killing machine. What terrified the delegates the most was not the violence itself, but her utter lack of malice, fear, or anger. Her expression was completely blank. She moved with the cold, practiced, and highly efficient demeanor of a line chef breaking down a large cut of tough meat during a frantic dinner service. She was reducing a galactic nightmare into raw, manageable ingredients. The second beast broke its sonic formation, enraged by the sudden fall of its packmate. It abandoned the acoustic assault and lunged directly at Emery, its massive jaws unhinging to reveal 3 overlapping rows of translucent, razor-sharp teeth designed to crush reinforced armor. This time, Emery did not even raise her knife. In a move of sheer, terrifying arrogance, she smoothly holstered the carbon blade back into her boot. As the massive jaws snapped downward, aiming to swallow her head entirely, Emery stepped aggressively forward, moving directly into the lethal strike zone. She raised her left arm, utilizing the thick, multi-layered fabric of her heavy canvas field jacket to jam her forearm forcefully into the delicate hinge of the creature's lower jaw. The sudden, agonizing pressure locked the monster's mouth violently open. With her right hand, she reached swiftly into a small utility pouch strapped to her waist. She extracted a dense, highly concentrated rock salt thermal energy pellet, which was a common, everyday tool used by deep space chefs to rapidly sear meat in zero-gravity environments. Emery thrust her arm deep down the creature's gaping throat. She bypassed the rows of sharp teeth and crushed the dense salt pellet directly against the highly sensitive, exposed mucous membranes at the base of its esophagus. The localized, intense burst of concentrated sodium and rapid thermal expansion triggered an instantaneous, catastrophic short circuit within the creature's complex neural communication network. The biological shockwave traveled straight to its brain. The beast's eyes rolled entirely backward into its heavily armored skull. Its massive limbs gave out instantly, and the massive body crashed onto the titanium floor, completely unconscious before its deadly jaws could even scratch her skin. She stepped over the fallen creature, wiping the thick saliva from her sleeve. However, the suffocating, crushing pressure inside the grand atrium did not subside. In fact, the lethal acoustic frequency was rapidly escalating. The third and largest predator, the undeniable alpha of the pack, was still locked in its corner. It was actively absorbing the lost resonance of its fallen mates, building an internal biological charge of catastrophic proportions. Emery paused, her keen survival instincts analyzing the vibrating air. Something was fundamentally wrong. The synchronized frequency driving the beasts was not a natural pack instinct. The rhythmic pulsing was far too synthetic, too perfectly timed. She realized with absolute clarity that the controlling signal was an artificial, localized broadcast. She slowly turned her head, her sharp eyes scanning the ruined hall, looking past the shattered glass and the bleeding dignitaries. She understood the terrifying truth of the situation. The transmitter controlling this entire biological assassination was not some remote device hidden in the walls. The signal was originating from right inside the room. The master control device was surgically implanted inside the body of a living person currently standing among them. The third apex predator, the undeniable alpha of the monstrous pack, was no longer merely a beast. It had completely transcended its biological limitations, rapidly transforming into a living and breathing weapon of mass destruction. The creature had absorbed the disrupted resonant frequencies of its two fallen packmates, drawing the violent acoustic vibrations deep into its own muscular core. Its physical form was terrifyingly unstable. The beast began to visibly swell, its thick and heavily armored hide stretching to its absolute tearing point. The bioluminescent crimson glow that radiated from beneath its thick scales shifted into a blinding and searing white heat. Every single vein protruding across its massive frame pulsed with hyper-concentrated chemical energy. The air immediately surrounding the creature began to warp and distort from the sheer localized thermal output. It was a mobile biological bomb, and it had entered the final and irreversible stages of its devastating countdown. A sharp and synthetic hum suddenly pierced the heavy, suffocating atmosphere. A shimmering, hexagonal energy shield flared to life, casting a sickly yellow light across the ruined titanium floor. Stepping out from the dark shadows of a collapsed decorative pillar was Ambassador Xylar. The towering plant and reptile hybrid was completely unaffected by the toxic vapor and the crushing acoustic pressure that had decimated the rest of the room. He stood safely within the confines of his personal protective barrier, a smug and horrific grin stretching across his scaled face. Xylar let out a wet and guttural sound that translated roughly as dark, triumphant laughter. "Your primitive butchery is mildly entertaining, human," Xylar hissed, his voice amplified by the sophisticated diplomatic translation collar secured around his thick neck. "But you are merely rearranging the dining chairs on a sinking starship. You cannot chop time into pieces, and your time has officially run out." Stepping forward to admire his horrific handiwork, Xylar proudly confessed to the orchestration of the entire massacre. This supposed culinary diplomacy conference was nothing but a highly convenient slaughterhouse. By wiping out the highest-ranking ambassadors and the central leadership of the Intergalactic Alliance in one single and catastrophic event, Xylar was effectively decapitating the galactic government. This grand assassination would plunge the Allied sectors into absolute chaos, clearing a direct and unopposed path for the massive invasion fleet of his home world. He boasted that thousands of warships and millions of soldiers were currently waiting in the dark void just beyond the sensor range of Aegis 9, ready to strike the moment the station went silent. "Do not bother looking for the manual override panels or the emergency exits," Xylar mocked, gesturing widely with his sharp, clawed hands toward the heavily sealed and dented blast doors. "I have personally fried the central mainframe of this neutral station. The heavy blast doors are permanently fused shut. The atmospheric scrubbers are completely offline and beyond repair. Every single automated defensive turret and environmental isolation protocol has been entirely disabled. We are trapped inside a sealed pressure cooker, and the venomous gas has already reached 99% saturation in the ambient air. A single spark, or a sufficiently loud sonic wave, will ignite the entire hall." The claustrophobia in the room became an actual, physical weight. The air was so incredibly thick and heavy, it felt like trying to breathe deep underwater. The ticking clock of their doom was not a mechanical sound, but the increasingly rapid, booming heartbeat of the swollen beast. The Alpha Predator took one final, ground-shaking step forward, planting its heavy claws firmly into the metal floor. Its massive jaws unhinged to a grotesque and unnatural angle, revealing a glowing, swirling vortex of volatile energy pooling deep within its cavernous throat. It drew in a massive, ragged breath, violently sucking the remaining oxygen out of the room. It was actively preparing to unleash the final, resonant roar that would ignite the saturated pheromones and violently vaporize every organic being trapped in the grand atrium. The surviving alien delegates, bleeding heavily and broken on the cold floor, finally surrendered to the inevitable. They closed their multiple eyes, whispered their final, desperate prayers to their respective deities, and waited for the searing heat of absolute oblivion. They were totally and utterly defeated by the inescapable trap. Emery Bunker, however, did not close her eyes. She did not fall to her knees, and she certainly did not pray. She simply turned her back on the terrifying Alpha Predator and walked with deliberate, unhurried steps across the ruined room toward the shattered molecular gastronomy station. The liquid nitrogen vat was severely cracked, leaking a thick, freezing white vapor across the bloody floor, plunging her bare hand directly into the freezing mist. Emery reached into the remnants of the cryogenic liquid. Her fingers wrapped tightly around the severed neurotoxin gland she had deposited there just moments ago. The intense, sub-zero temperatures had frozen the biological bomb completely solid, but the thick, dark blood of the creature still coated its uneven surface. She pulled the heavy and frozen mass out of the cold vapor. She held the bloody, lethal organ up to the flickering emergency strobe lights. Her eyes narrowed, inspecting the frozen, venomous tissue with the deep, critical evaluation of a master chef checking the exact quality of a very dangerous, highly exotic ingredient. The room was frozen in the amber of impending death. The Alpha Predator's jaws were wide open, a swirling vortex of kinetic and chemical energy preparing to ignite the saturated atmosphere. Ambassador Xylar watched with a triumphant sneer, completely secure behind his personal energy barrier, waiting for the shockwave that would reduce the diplomatic elite to ash. In this moment of absolute, terrifying finality, Emery Bunker performed an act of such profound and irrational absurdity that it shattered the very concept of biological logic. She raised the heavy, frozen neurotoxin gland, dripping with thick blue blood, directly to her face. She did not throw it. She did not attempt to use it as a weapon. She opened her mouth and bit down hard into the deadly tissue. A sickening, heavy crunch echoed through the silent terror of the hall as her teeth sheared through the frozen outer membrane and into the highly concentrated venom sac within. She chewed with deliberate, rhythmic motions, crushing the lethal alien biology between her molars, and swallowed. Xylar stopped laughing. His reptilian eyes widened to the point of tearing. His cybernetic translation collar emitted a high-pitched whine as it failed to process the sheer impossibility of what his optic nerves were registering. That specific neurotoxin was classified as a universal solvent for carbon-based life. A single drop was capable of liquefying a human nervous system in under 2 seconds. She should have melted from the inside out, her bones turning to liquid ash before she even finished chewing. But Emery did not melt. The devastating crucible of Kepler-99 had done far more than teach her how to cook. Consuming 6 of those apex predators over the course of 420 days had fundamentally and permanently rewritten her genetic code. Her body had been forced to adapt to the most aggressive venom in the known universe, synthesizing it, breaking it down, and integrating it into her own cellular structure. She was no longer just a chef. Her internal biology was the most advanced, perfectly adapted antibody laboratory in the galaxy. The massive alpha predator threw its head forward. The detonation roar tore from its throat, a catastrophic wave of sonic force meant to ignite the room. Simultaneously, Emery took a deep, aggressive breath, drawing the suffocating toxic air deep into her lungs. The moment the alien venom hit her bloodstream, her body reacted violently, but not with death. A brilliant, pulsing emerald green light erupted from beneath her skin. The glowing light mapped every single vein and artery in her body, illuminating her entire cardiovascular system through her canvas jacket. She had achieved complete biological fusion. As the beast unleashed its roar, Emery opened her mouth and forcefully exhaled. It was not a scream. It was a massive, billowing cloud of dense, shimmering silver gas. It was a perfectly synthesized antipheromone, a chemical countermeasure instantly manufactured by her mutated lungs. The silver cloud violently collided with the beast's sonic wave. The resulting chemical reaction did not explode. Instead, it aggressively neutralized the air. The heavy, silver fog rushed down the throat of the alpha predator, smothering the glowing red energy instantly. The apocalyptic roar was abruptly choked off, turning into a pathetic, wet sputter. The terrifying biological resonance was utterly destroyed. The enormous, swollen beast violently deflated, its glowing crimson hide fading rapidly, back to a dull, sickly gray. It blinked its multiple eyes in deep confusion, swaying on its heavy legs. Then, the ultimate killing machine of the outer rim let out a soft, high-pitched whimper. It lowered its massive, armored head, folded its deadly claws inward, and dropped flat onto its belly at Emery's feet, completely submissive, like a thoroughly reprimanded and tamed puppy yielding to the true apex predator of the room. The chemical composition of the room rapidly stabilized. The thick, acidic haze dissipated into harmless condensation. The suffocating pressure vanished, allowing the terrified alien delegates to finally gasp in lungfuls of clean, breathable air. Xylar panicked. The brilliant tactical mind of the alien warlord completely broke. He deactivated his energy shield and turned to flee toward the ruined blast doors. His heavy, scaled feet scrambling frantically against the polished titanium floor. Emery did not even turn to look at him. She merely raised her right hand and pointed a single, steady finger directly at the fleeing ambassador. The tamed beast at her feet exploded into motion, It bypassed the bleeding diplomats completely, clearing the distance in a single, terrifying leap. Its massive jaws snapped shut around the torso of Ambassador Xylar. The sound of his advanced bio-armor crushing under thousands of pounds of pressure was sharp and definitive. Xylar let out one final, gurgling scream before the beast casually tossed his broken, unconscious form across the hall. The grand atrium fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The surviving intergalactic elite stared at the small human woman, standing amidst the absolute carnage. Emery calmly raised the back of her hand and wiped a streak of glowing blue blood from the corner of her mouth. She reached into the unblemished lower cabinet of the shattered molecular gastronomy station and pulled out a single, perfectly clean ceramic plate. She brushed a speck of dust off its surface, turned toward the trembling, high-ranking chairman of the Diplomatic Council, and spoke with the absolute chilling calmness of a professional completely unfazed by a chaotic kitchen service. "The appetizer has been successfully neutralized," she announced, her voice echoing clearly in the now quiet room. "Does everyone prefer medium rare or well done?" As the delegates stared at her, a profound and horrifying realization washed over the entire assembly. This human had not simply survived the most dangerous food chain in the cosmos. She had devoured its entire ecosystem. Dear viewers of Z Sci-Fi Stories, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for listening to today's tale. We would love to know where you are listening to this story from, so please let us know in the comments below. If you found today's story thrilling and entertaining, please consider helping us out. Because YouTube has demonetized our channel, we have lost our operating budget. By generously donating just $1, you provide the essential funds we need to pay our dedicated staff, allowing them to support their families and put food on their tables. Your contribution ensures that we can continue creating even more amazing stories for you. You can easily support us by scanning the donation QR code currently displayed on the screen, or by clicking the donation link provided in the description or the comments section of this video. Thank you so much for your incredible support.